They fined me $10,000, 10 grand, for controlling water. Yeah, you heard that right. Not dumping chemicals, not building something illegal, not blasting music at 2 a.m., water. On my own land. So I did the only reasonable thing I could think of. I stopped controlling it. I let it go. I opened the dam. Now before you think I just snapped one day and went full villain, let me back up a little, because this whole thing didn't start with anger. It started with peace. Real peace. The kind you don't even realize you have until someone shows up with a clipboard and ruins it. I live on the edge of a quiet little development. Well, it used to be quiet before the Maple Ridge Estates HOA decided they were the governing body of the universe. My place sits right at the border, and behind my house there's this small lake I built years ago. Not some luxury yacht lake or anything, just a solid, honest body of water, fed by a creek, surrounded by trees, ducks nesting every spring, frogs singing at dusk like they're getting paid for it. And yeah, I built a spillway dam. Nothing fancy, just a simple gate system so I could manage water levels when the rains came hard, keep erosion from chewing up the banks, protect the land downstream. It worked. It always worked. For years. Nobody complained. Nobody even noticed. Nature did its thing. I just gave it a little guidance. Then the HOA moved in next door. Not just any HOA, though. This was the kind that comes in hot, like they've been waiting their whole lives to tell people what shade of beige their mailbox should be. New board, new president, Linda Carver. And if you've ever met someone who treats a neighborhood like a kingdom, you know the type. Always smiling, always concerned, but there's this edge to it, like she's measuring your fence height with her eyes while pretending to compliment your lawn. The first sign something was off? A notice taped to my gate. Not mailed. Not emailed. Taped. Like I was a teenager getting grounded. It said I was illegally manipulating community water drainage systems. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't missing a punchline. Community water system? My lake had been there longer than their entire subdivision. The creek? Natural. The dam? On my property. Entirely. I even pulled up old county maps just to double check, not because I doubted myself, but because I couldn't believe someone would make a claim that ridiculous without at least trying to sound believable. So I did what any sane person would do. I responded calmly. Sent an email explaining everything, dates, boundaries, even attached documentation showing the lake predated their development. I figured, okay, misunderstanding, right? Someone new, doesn't know the history, we clear it up, move on. Yeah, no. They ignored me. Completely. Like I'd sent my email into a black hole. A week later, another letter showed up, this one in an envelope, a little more official, a lot more aggressive. Now they were demanding I cease all adjustments to water flow immediately. According to them, my dam posed a potential flooding risk to the neighborhood. I actually laughed. Out loud. Standing in my kitchen, holding that letter, just laughing. Because the lake had been stable for years. Through storms, through heavy rain seasons, through everything. Not one incident. Not one complaint. But suddenly, it was a threat. And here's where it started to shift, just slightly, from ridiculous to something else. Because a few days later, I noticed something. Neighbors, people I'd waved to for years, started acting different. Hesitant. One guy, Mark, stopped me while I was checking the shoreline and asked, real cautious, hey, is everything okay with the lake? Like he was expecting me to say, no, it's about to swallow your house whole. That's when it clicked a little. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. This was narrative. Someone was telling a story, and people were starting to believe it. 2 weeks after that second letter, the hammer dropped. A fine. $10,000. Printed clean, official, no hesitation. Unauthorized control of water systems impacting community safety. $10,000 for turning a wheel on my own property. That was the moment my peaceful mornings, coffee by the lake, watching the mist lift off the water, turned into something else entirely. A standoff. And Linda? Oh, she didn't stop at letters. She came to my property, walked right up near the fence line, pointing at the lake like she was presenting evidence in court. This, she said, affects the entire community. Not asking, declaring. I remember just standing there, arms crossed, listening to her talk about shared environmental responsibility and risk management. All these polished phrases that sound reasonable until you realize they're being used to justify stepping onto someone else's land, figuratively, and maybe eventually literally. And the wild part? Some neighbors were nodding. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make it uncomfortable. Enough to make it feel like I was suddenly the problem. That's when the frustration really started to settle in. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. Like pressure building behind something. Because I knew the truth. The lake wasn't the issue. The water wasn't the issue. Control was. They needed a reason to extend authority, and I just happened to be the easiest target. The guy with the visible thing they could point at. The lake. The dam. Simple story. Easy to sell. But here's the thing about pressure, it doesn't just sit there forever. It builds. Quietly. Patiently. And eventually, it looks for a way out. Alright, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting, not just emotionally, but structurally, like how these situations actually happen in real life. According to standard procedure, an HOA doesn't just get to wander outside its jurisdiction and start enforcing rules on private property that isn't governed by its bylaws. That's not how it's supposed to work. Their authority typically stops at the boundary lines defined in their CC and AMP, RS. Those covenants, conditions, and restrictions everyone signs when they buy into the neighborhood. If your land isn't part of that agreement, they don't get to invent power over it just because it's nearby. From a legal perspective, what they were doing was leaning hard on ambiguity, using words like potential risk and community impact to stretch their influence. And here's the thing, those phrases are intentionally vague. They're designed to sound serious enough that people don't question them. This is a psychological trap. You introduce fear, flooding, damage, safety, and suddenly logic takes a back seat. Neighbors start imagining worst-case scenarios, even if there's no evidence. And once enough people feel uneasy, the HOA gains leverage, not through law, but through perception. And the lesson here is, control doesn't always come from authority. It often comes from convincing others that authority already exists. So yeah, once I saw it clearly, once I understood that this wasn't about water or safety or even the lake, it changed how I looked at everything. Because now it wasn't just annoying, it was deliberate. It was a move. And if you've ever dealt with someone who plays that kind of quiet power game, you know exactly what I mean. They don't come at you loud. They come at you persistent, structured, smiling while they tighten the screws. And for a while, I'll be honest, I didn't do anything. Not because I agreed, but because I was thinking. Walking the property at night, hands in my pockets, just listening to the water moving behind the dam, steady, controlled, predictable, the way it had always been. I kept replaying everything. Every letter, every word Linda used, every sideways glance from neighbors who suddenly weren't sure about me anymore. And the more I thought about it, the more something settled in my chest. Not anger exactly, clarity. Because if their entire argument was that I was controlling the water, then what happens if I don't? That idea didn't hit like a lightning bolt or anything dramatic. It just kind of landed. Quiet. Logical. Almost obvious. A few days passed. The HOA kept doing their thing. Emails, subtle pressure. Linda walking around like she was inspecting a construction site she didn't own. And then one afternoon, everything lined up. Not planned like a movie scene, just timing. Linda was across the neighborhood, talking to a landscaping crew about some decorative pathway. A few residents were outside, weekend energy, people walking dogs, kids riding bikes, that kind of thing. Calm. Normal. I remember standing on my back porch for a minute before moving, just looking out at the lake. The surface was still, reflecting the sky like glass, ducks drifting near the edge, completely unaware of human nonsense. And I thought about how many mornings I'd stood in that exact spot, coffee in hand, not a single problem in the world. Then I walked. Down the slope, through the grass, toward the dam. No rush. No hesitation. Just a steady pace like I'd done it 100 times before, which I had. Because this wasn't some foreign system. This was mine. I built it. I maintained it. I understood it. When I got to the control wheel, I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew this was the moment where everything shifted. Once you do something like this, you don't get to rewind it. There's no just kidding. I could hear the water behind the dam, pressing, waiting, not violently, just present. And I remember thinking, fine, you don't want me controlling it? Then I won't. I grabbed the metal wheel. Cold, solid, familiar. And I turned it. Slow at first, the gears groaning like they hadn't been asked to do this in a while. then smoother as the mechanism caught. The spill gate began to rise, inch by inch, and for a second there was this low, heavy silence, like the world holding its breath. Then it happened. Water surged through. Not a trickle, not a polite stream. No, this was a full, rushing release. A deep, roaring sound as the lake pushed forward through the spillway, reclaiming the path it had always been meant to follow. It hit the channel below with force, spreading, moving fast but naturally, like it had been waiting for permission that never should have been required. Within seconds, people noticed. You could hear it before you saw it. The sound alone was enough to turn heads. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A dog started barking. Someone shouted, "What is that?" And then the reactions started stacking. A couple of neighbors came running toward the lake, eyes wide, phones already out like they were documenting a disaster. Others froze where they stood, just staring, trying to process what they were seeing. There's this moment, right before panic fully sets in, where people are still deciding how afraid they should be, and you could feel that hanging in the air. "Is it flooding?" someone yelled. And here's the thing. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, hands relaxed at my sides, watching. Not smug, not angry, just present. Because I already knew the answer. The water wasn't heading toward their homes. Not even close. It followed the natural slope of the land, the same one it had always followed, long before any of those houses were built. It curved away from the residential lots, and straight toward something else. The HOA community field. Now, if you've ever seen one of those shared neighborhood spaces, you know the type. Perfectly trimmed grass, decorative flower beds, winding walking paths, maybe a couple of benches placed just right so people can sit and pretend life is a brochure. That field sat lower than the surrounding area, beautifully landscaped, and completely unprepared for actual water flow. So when the surge reached it, it didn't destroy anything violently. It didn't rip trees out or knock structures down. It just filled it. Calmly, steadily, undeniably. Water spread across the grass, creeping over the edges of the pathways, pooling around the benches, soaking into the flower beds that had never been designed to handle more than a sprinkler system. And suddenly, the panic shifted, because people realized, wait, our houses are fine. You could see it on their faces. That transition, fear melting into confusion, confusion into something else, something a little uncomfortable. Recognition. Meanwhile, the field? That was a different story. The neat little gravel paths disappeared under shallow water. The bright flowers drooped under the weight. Decorative stones shifted slightly as the flow settled into place. It wasn't chaos, it was correction. Nature, doing exactly what it had always intended to do. And right on cue, Linda showed up. She came fast, like someone who had been alerted mid-conversation and didn't quite believe what she was about to see. But when she reached the edge of that field, she stopped. Just stopped. Her expression, it's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but it genuinely looked like someone had just unplugged her confidence. The kind of face you make when reality doesn't match the script you've been pushing. She looked from the water, to the field, then back toward the lake. Toward me. "What did you do?" she shouted, voice sharp, cutting through the air. And I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step forward. Didn't gesture. I just answered, plain and simple. I stopped controlling the water. That was it. No speech. No explanation. Just the truth. And the thing about truth, especially in moments like that, is that it lands heavier than any argument ever could. Because there was nothing for her to push against. No violation. No secret action. I had done exactly what they demanded. I ceased adjusting the water. The silence that followed, that was the loudest part of the whole day. No one argued. No one accused. Because now everyone could see it. The houses weren't in danger. They never had been. The only thing affected was the one area the HOA actually controlled, their curated, carefully managed version of nature. And it couldn't handle reality. Over the next few days, things got quiet. Real quiet. No more letters. No more emails. No follow-ups. The $10,000 fine? Gone. Just disappeared. No apology, of course. People like that don't do apologies. But the absence of pressure said everything. Crews came out eventually to drain the field, fix the pathways, replant the flowers. Quietly. Efficiently. Like they were trying to erase evidence of something they never wanted acknowledged in the first place. And me? I didn't celebrate. Didn't gloat. Didn't even bring it up to anyone. I just went back to my routine. Walking the edge of the lake in the mornings, watching the water move, naturally now. No adjustments, no interference. And every time I passed that dam, every time I heard the steady flow through the open gate, there was this quiet sense of balance. Not victory, something better than that. Resolution. Because in the end, I didn't fight them. I didn't out-argue them or outmaneuver them. I just stepped out of the role they tried to force me into and let reality do the talking. So yeah, that's how it ended. No courtroom, no dramatic showdown, no official statement clearing my name. Just silence and a field that had to be quietly rebuilt because someone thought control was more important than understanding. And I've thought about it a lot since then, not just the situation itself, but what it says about how people operate when you give them just a little bit of authority or even the illusion of it. Because that's really what this was. Not a water issue, not a safety issue, a control issue, wrapped in paperwork and dressed up like concern. The lesson here is power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up as a polite email, a posted notice, a friendly reminder that slowly turns into a demand. And if no one pushes back, if no one questions it, it just keeps expanding, bit by bit, inch by inch, until suddenly someone else is making decisions about things that were never theirs to begin with. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this isn't just about HOAs. This kind of dynamic shows up everywhere. Workplaces, social groups, even families. Someone frames a situation in a way that benefits them, repeats it enough times, gets a few people on their side, and before you know it, that version of reality starts to feel like the only version. That's the psychological part people don't talk about enough. It's not force, it's consensus, or at least the appearance of it. You saw it with my neighbors. Good people, reasonable people. But once the idea of flood risk got planted, it didn't matter that there was no evidence. The possibility alone was enough to shift how they saw me. And that's dangerous, because once perception flips, defending yourself starts to look like guilt. Explaining yourself starts to sound like excuses. You're no longer just living your life. You're managing how other people interpret it. From a legal perspective, what saved me wasn't some brilliant strategy. It was boundaries. Clear, physical, documented boundaries. My land, my structure, my system. And once I stopped engaging on their terms, once I stopped trying to argue inside the narrative they created, and instead stepped completely outside of it, the whole thing collapsed under its own weight. Because their claim depended on one key idea, that I was actively controlling something dangerous. The moment I removed that piece, there was nothing left to stand on. No control, no violation, no argument. Just water, doing what water does. Now, I'm not saying everyone should go out and open the dam in their own situation, whatever that looks like. Sometimes the stakes are higher. Sometimes the consequences aren't as clean. But there's something to be said for recognizing when you're being pulled into a game that was designed for you to lose. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to play better. It's to stop playing entirely. And yeah, I'll admit, there was a part of me that found the whole thing a little poetic. They were so focused on controlling the outcome, on shaping everything into this neat, predictable system, that they forgot the one variable you can't really dominate. Reality. Nature. The thing that doesn't care about policies or committees or how convincing your email sounds. Water doesn't read notices. It doesn't attend HOA meetings. It doesn't negotiate. It just follows the path that makes sense. And in a weird way, maybe we're not that different. Or at least, we shouldn't be. Because if there's one thing I took from all of this, it's that clarity matters more than compliance. Understanding your position, your rights, your boundaries, your reality. That's what keeps you grounded when everything around you starts getting distorted. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, where someone's trying to tell you what your reality is, what your space means, what your actions represent, take a second. Step back. Ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just a really confident story someone's telling? Because those two things, they're not the same, not even close. And I'm curious, seriously, what would you have done? Would you have paid the fine just to make it go away? Fought it legally? Tried to reason with people who already made up their minds? Or would you have done exactly what I did, stepped aside, and let the truth speak for itself, even if it made a little mess along the way? Drop your thoughts below. I read everything. And trust me, in situations like this, there's always more than one way the story could have gone.